Hello, it's Gabrielle here, and welcome again to this week's Menopause Running Club video. So, this week I'm going to talk about how our bodies are changing, really, and the key and how that's impacting our running, and the key things that then you need to know if you're going to look at your running training more holistically to address these issues that we're experiencing through menopause, and just do what we know is going to be effective to help us to become stronger, more resilient. So, and that means avoiding injury, bouncing back from injury more, quicker, um, around this time when we're going through the menopause. Because I think, it's been really lovely to have so many little conversations with people in sort of direct messages. And it means a lot to us now. It really does. And some of us we're all different. There's a lot of people who've been running for a long time. There's a lot of people who've come to it really, really recently or quite late on around menopause, which is brilliant. And we do it for a reason because it's just so nice, isn't it? Just to be outside and to just have that time either to yourself or in a group running, it's just everything. And I know for me, once I sort of realized how much my body was changing and how I had to adapt my training to running, it started to change how I thought about my training in a way, because running meant so much to me. I was prepared to do that little bit extra work or just be a bit smarter with what I was doing in order to be able to keep going. So some of these things you'll know already, but I'm just going to sort of run through it. You might see my eyes drifting over here because I've got my notes. I have to have a little, I have to have a little structure, otherwise I'll just go on, go on forever. So some of the things that you're likely to know. So we know that when we hit menopause, or over that period from 35 onwards, actually, we do start to lose muscle mass. We reach our peak in our mid 30s, and then it starts to decline. But that rate of decline speeds up when we get to menopause. And that has an impact on our bones as well, because there's a relationship between muscle strength and bone, because part of the stress of muscles working on the bone is what keeps them strong. But we also know that we sort of start to, lose bone density as as we get older, unless we do something about it. And then the change in estrogen causes many symptoms, and I'm not going to go into all of them here, but more the ones that would physically affect the running. And that can be in the inflammation that causes pain in joints and muscles, and that can be really unpleasant because it can impact your confidence, because you never really know if something's wrong or not, or just to carry on running. And then another one, which is not quite linked to menopause per se, or not directly, is muscle imbalances. And this is more of a time thing more than anything. And our muscles work in pairs and they have to be balanced. But what's really common, because when we say sit down for years on end, then the muscles at the front of our body become shorter and tighter, and the muscles at the back of our body become stretched and weaker. That affects our posture and can create sort of, our joints being out of alignment. But it also it means that the tighter, shorter muscles tend to start working harder than the stretched, weaker ones. So this is why we know that running is repetitive. But what's happening is that almost in a way, fewer muscles are doing the running, which is putting more pressure on those dominant muscles, which start to become overworked, and then we start to look at overuse injuries. So, and what we also know, about muscles is that if you're not using them, you lose them. So if, for example, you're a very quad dominant runner, you could actually find that you've got quite a flat backside because that's not really doing a lot of the work. And what we do know is that those unused muscles can then start to become weaker. If we're not using them, they'll get smaller. And so this whole sort of compensation cycle just perpetuates over time. And this is why it's really important then to add in strength training, because unless what strength training allows us to do is to target all these sort of lazy muscles or these weaker muscles and get them working again. And I come at this I mean, I've been a runner for a very long time. I stopped in menopause. I just fell out of love with it, and I started again. And I have been strength training very consistently for quite a long time, but that wasn't enough for me to then stay injury free. And I started noticing changes in my gait. Bizarrely enough, I felt like my feet were just ploddy and I wasn't walking properly, if that makes sense. And what's happening is that a lot of our smaller, more forgotten muscles, like our feet muscles, start to check out a little bit. That's been my own personal experience. And these are forgotten muscles. We don't think about them. I could be doing big moves like squats, lunges, deadlifts, glute thrust with pretty heavy weights. But I've realized that that's not enough. I have to train some of those small forgotten muscles. I have to do calf raises and other specific exercises for my feet, which I'm going to share about over time. But also there's muscles in my hips that are weak. So I might have been able to do a big deadlift, but there's some things that, like a side plank and certain variations on that were just a killer. So what we can do with strength training when we look at with from a running point of view is start to bring that balance back. And what that means is we're then getting all these muscles again that working together. That takes off the load off the dominant muscles, prevents that overuse, and it starts to restore good movement. And that's when we start to reduce our injuries over time. So it's a really important part of running. So but we can't do everything in one go. And we're all at a point in our journey. So I'm just going to go through sort of various stages so you can see how you might think about training progressively over time. And we talk about strength, but one of the things that we also need for running is power. And a good way to think about power is strength times speed. It's the ability to move quickly. And we actually, as menopausal women, lose power faster than we lose strength because it's a different type of contraction in our muscles that creates power. And we have to train that back in. And that can be one of the reasons that you might find you're slower. You can't get up hills in the same way. You might find that even though you're running, you don't feel like you're as agile or your balance is as good because the power is what we need to move quickly. If we sort of stumble or we're not on even surfaces, the power in our feet and ankles is what would correct us and put us back into the right posture straight away. So we have to start to look at the bigger picture. So understanding what's changing is really helpful because then we can start to put together a phased plan. And one of the concepts in strength training, which is equally true to running, is something called progressive overload. We have to be putting more stimulus and more different challenges through our body all of the time to enable it to adapt. So I remember years ago, I just used to plod along and just do the same slow runs, which I really liked. Don't get me wrong, but it was interesting because I noticed that I was doing the same runs all the time, but they were getting harder, and this was before menopause. And so what we have to be doing is we get used to something, and then we change the stimulus on our body to make it work a little bit harder. And that's how we protect ourselves from the body getting used to it and becoming more efficient and therefore getting weaker. So adding some strength training and varying your runs, which I'm going to talk about both of those, will be an antidote to that. So we keep progressing, we keep getting stronger, and we keep pushing against that natural aging process and just slowing it down because you really can do that with a good approach to your running. You can slow down the aging process or the natural progress really quite effectively. And that's exciting to me because I think when we're this age, we don't understand our bodies. We feel like it's start of a slow decline. But the really great news is, and I really hang on to this, is if we keep going, we can get better and we can slow down that decline. So we've got everything to be optimistic about, assuming we've got all the time in the world to do the extra training. So let me go into the different priorities. So I'm just going to break these down. There's like a priority 1, a priority 2, a priority 3, and you could think about these as training phases as well. So a priority 1 would be to get all of our muscles working together, like I said. So it might be that you've got dominant quads, but your hamstrings need work and your glutes need work. So that's our priority then, is to introduce strength training that's going to find and switch on all of these muscles. Another thing that can happen, or that, we're not symmetrical. We'll have our left side might be weaker than our right side, or vice versa. So there are things that we can do to make sure that we've got as balanced strength as we possibly can. And that means doing things like single leg exercises. So lunges are a great example of that. You can do glute bridges, but you can also do single leg glute bridges. So as a priority one, I would, if you were brand new to strength training, not do single leg because they're harder, but you would start building up some of the basic exercises, but then as part of your progression, going on to single leg. So you might be doing just normal glute bridges for a couple of weeks, and then you'd be trying single legs, because you'll be really surprised to notice when you start to think about your glute muscles as two things, a left and a right, that one can be an awful lot weaker than the other. And when we don't know that, because we're not aware of it, we don't realize that one side is dominating or carrying the other side to a degree. So as part of this overall process to restore good balance and good running function, we want to try and even out as much as we can any left to right imbalances. And one of the things that we also don't think about when we're younger is our tendons. And if you're fairly new to running, or if you're training for a longer distance, the advice is to train up gradually. And one of the reasons for this is because our tendons take longer to adapt than our muscles. And we have to be mindful of that. And there are certain things or certain ways in our strength training that we can really target our tendons. And that's the eccentric part of the exercise. So that becomes something that's very important. So if you were doing a deadlift, it's the part of the deadlift where you're bending down, going in the direction of gravity, that you want to be going really slow, holding it at the bottom so your hamstrings are just holding that stretch. That's going to help work your tendons. So we've got to add this in at this age. We didn't have to really think about that when we were younger. So that would be a priority one. Then once we've sort of got all the muscles working well, and we're paying attention to our tendons, and left and right are starting to function in a similar way, then a priority two is starting to train some specific movement patterns that prepare us for running, and that can improve running technique. So that can involve things like lunges, or lunges with twists, and side lunges. So there's certain movements that we can use, and also being very mindful of what we need to do to improve our running technique, which is actually the backward stroke. So exercises that mean that we're pushing our back leg out and our heel out and using our hamstrings and our glutes are really good exercises to add in, because they're going to help with our running form as well. And things that we want to be thinking about in priority two are looking at our ankles and our hips. Our hips should have a major part to play in driving us forwards when we're running, not strength training. And when our feet and our hips are working well, we have a lot less knee problems, which is really important. So there's certain things that we do which train us for the running pattern. And glute bridges, glute thrusts would be another one, because that's mimicking some of the moves that we would do when we're running. And this is where core comes in as well, believe it or not, because we need to have good posture. When you slouch and when you're sort of not holding yourself properly, or you're looking at the floor too much, then that's creating imbalances that can cause issues in your lower back and your hamstrings, for example. So we need to be strengthening our core so that we're upright and have good posture while we run. And there is a link between core strength and endurance. So we can start to fatigue when we're running, not because our legs are tired, but because we can't hold our core up anymore. So these would be priority two things, to be looking at what we need to strengthen in order to make us better running. When we get to priority three, or level three, then we start to look at how we build bigger strength. And that means shifting up to heavier weights. And that would be building strength in lunges, squats, deadlifts, glute thrusts. So then you're going back to more of your classic exercise. But what that does is these exercises, you can all start to eventually get really heavy. Not going too heavy on the earlier phases. And that improves the force production of our feet onto the ground. So that improves our running technique and helps to make us faster. And then on the fifth on the priority four or level four is then when we start to build in power, more explosive training. And that's where we're moving fast. So kettlebell swings can come in really, into their own here. Things like jumping lunges, jumping squats. If you have a box, you might be doing a box jump. So you don't have to do a lot of that, fortunately, because that's really hard. But these are things that we then build in, and that's going to be helpful when we're doing sprinting or when we're doing hill training. If we want to be getting faster over time, then these are the things that are going to help us. So that's how we can think about an approach that's gradually going to get our body functioning really well, running in good form and good posture, and then building up the strength and the power of our bodies. And this whole process is a long one, and it might take a couple of years to work your way through those things, depending on where you're starting from. But in a way, I think it's nice to think that we can just keep, we take the pressure off ourselves to sort of be an amazing runner right now, and just enjoy that process. And just knowing that there's something new to add in all the time can actually be really enjoyable and really motivating. And then from a running point of view, you can also adapt your running training as well, depending on your goals. So to begin with, one of the things that's key now is that doesn't help us is doing these steady, same old tempo runs all the time. And a trap that a lot of runners fall into, and I'm the same, is that we just do these sort of moderate intensity runs. So they're not that hard, but they're not that easy. And we might do the same pace all the time. That was how I ran when I was younger. I never varied it. I could run every day and I would run in the same way, which is very nice. It's very enjoyable. It's very easy. But the problem with that now at this age is that because we don't have as much estrogen, we need to do two things actually. We need to, one, take some of the stress off our bodies because of our recovery rate slowing down. And the other thing we have to do, which is at the opposite side of that, is actually put greater stress or stimulus through our bodies, because that forces them to adapt more effectively in the absence of as much estrogen as we had before. So when we were younger, we had more hormones that built our muscles up for us, and we could therefore have a sort of a muscle growth response with a lighter or lower stimulus. Now we have to ramp it up. So the theory or the recommendations are that we start to polarize our training. So we do more really easy runs, which are great because they take the stress off your body, and then we do a fewer harder runs. And if you're just beginning, you wouldn't necessarily need to worry about that too much. You would want to build up your tolerance to the easy runs and get used to those miles. But then there'll be a point when you know that that's okay and you can start to progress a little bit. And that might be where you introduce some harder runs where you're running faster or doing sprints or running uphill. So they're the things that we need to change. And the training then specifically is looking at speed, is looking at power. So a speed is a sprint across a very short distance. Power would be in sprints, but also into running up hills. And then other things that we can do are agility drills that just are little quick movements on our feet that can help us to just retain the agility and our ability to have good contact with the floor and quick steps, because that falls into a good running technique as well. So they're things that we can do to mix up the running to give us better results. And for anybody who is concerned with weight gain or maybe frustrated that they're running and they're not seeing any of the changes, adding in the strength and adding in some of these polarizing your runs to make them either really easy or really hard also help with the body recomposition as well. So they're really effective ways to then start to build muscle and get less body fat, which a lot of people are concerned about, when we get to this age group. And then recovery, just wanted to touch on that as well, because I know some people have talked about this to me, and recognizing that we just need more recovery now. And that's because we've got less estrogen or maybe higher inflammation. Now, it's really frustrating because our heads might want to just go running more often than we should be doing. But having recovery and taking days off is really important. You'll have to sort of play around and find the right level for you. But really, what you should be aiming for is when you go for a run, you feel good and you feel like you're not dragging yourself around and it's killing you. You actually should feel quite energized, like you've recovered well from your last one. And you can enjoy it and maintain a good pace and get something, productive out of your training. When you start to that starts to disappear and you're tired, you're not really recovering, you might not be sleeping very well, you might feel like you're getting more coughs and colds or a few more twinges cropping up, then that's a sign that you've overtrained and you really need to pull that back. And it's really important to just pay attention to that. Sometimes our ego, and I've been guilty, doesn't want to do it because we want to keep going. But really, we have to think more strategically and play the long game and give ourselves time to have, to recover, because we don't recover from training while we're training. We grow and get stronger and fitter and faster when we're not. So if we want to see the progress, we have to give our bodies time to create that progress. And that comes from good food and good sleep. There are some things, if you feel that you just can't sit in front of the TV for a day and do nothing, then there's a thing called active recovery, but that would be really doing low impact stuff, low impact, low stress stuff. So that would be yoga, Pilates, swimming, really, really gentle runs, can be in that, or going for a walk, a bike ride. That you can still be active, but you're trying to just give your body a break and a rest to allow it to adapt. And then there's things like massage, foam rolling, saunas. They're all brilliant things for recovery. And I do recommend thinking about having regular massages as well and just getting to know your body. I have, you don't quite often notice, when you get an injury, you know about that. But what's bizarre when you get an injury is usually the place where you're injured isn't the place where the problem is. So you might have a sort of a pain in your back or a pain high up in your leg from your tendon, but you'll feel it lower down. So there'll be tightness somewhere that's causing that pain that's not necessarily at the site of the pain. And we're oblivious to that. I remember one of the first times I had a massage, it was quite a while ago, and I had no idea. I was conscious of having a bad back, but I had no idea how tight my thighs were, my quads at the front, until the massage therapist rolled over them and I nearly I nearly jumped off the table. It was so painful. And I didn't notice, I had no idea until she touched them, because and that touch from massage can really identify and highlight where we've got tender, painful areas. That's over tight muscles and that needs relaxing. So doing some of this self massage can help you discover what those areas are, and or having a massage. But that's really important, because we want to, this whole process of balancing the body that we're trying to get rid of and stretch out the tight, tender areas, but strengthen the longer, weaker, the stretched, weaker areas. That's how we restore balance. So we have to understand where the weak parts are and where the tense parts are. And at about the same time as that, I had like I say, I had a bad back and I was going to yoga, and I could almost put my head on my knees, and I was really quite proud of myself. I was thinking, oh, look how bendy I am. But at that time, I didn't know that I was actually making the problem worse, because I had these ridiculously tight quads and I was just doing all this yoga that was making my hamstrings longer and therefore weaker than they already were, and pushing myself right out of balance. So this is why you need to get to know your body. So I always think it's good to have a physio, to have someone who you go to regular massages with, because this is a process that's really important for us now, to start to understand what's working well and what needs attention, because we're only as strong as our weakest link. And all these little things that crop up, all these little injuries are a sign, and they tell us, so they're good information. So yes, that's part of that holistic picture. So I hope that gives you some good ideas or some good understanding of, one, how your body's changing. Two, how you can progress and vary your training over time to get better, and why you should as well. And then the flip side is that you can actually start to really enjoy the recovery if you let yourself. So hope you've enjoyed that. Hope you found it helpful. Please feel free, if you have any questions in relation to that, just to ask them in the Facebook group, because I'll be very happy to either give more information or clarify. All right. Thank you for watching. I'll see you soon. Enjoy the rest of your day.